Right. Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We've had lots of sign-ups for this session, so we were waiting for as many people as who could join us, and then we begin. But in the meantime, it'd be great to hear from all of you where you're joining us from as we wait for more people to join in. Thank you. And I mean, it's extremely heartening to see the length and the breadth of the country represented in the people who've joined us here today. Thank you very much and warm welcome again. My name is Bakul, and I am the head of program development at the India Mental Health Alliance. And I'm very, very honored and privileged to be moderating this session today. As we wait for people to join us, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about the India Mental Health Alliance and then set the context for our session today, introduce to you our panelists, as well as the book on which this panel is based. Um, the India Mental Health Alliance is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2023 by founding trustees Vasvi and Ashish Bharatram in partnership with mental health organizations IMHA and Children First. I do know and recognize a lot of names here, so a lot of you have been part of our programs before, but for the ones who are joining us first, I just want to tell you a little bit about us. Lived experience expertise is very central to IMHA's ethos and vision. Several members of our board, our founding cohort, our steering council, and our core team bring with them personal journeys of either living with, navigating, or caring for someone with mental health concerns. And these experiences, these perspectives, and this expertise has actively shaped and is shaping how we think about mental health systems, power, care, accountability, practice, and policy. We formally launched the Alliance in late 2024 with the aim of bringing together cross-sectoral stakeholders from across the country to mainstream mental health as a development agenda and co-create knowledge. And so as of today, our alliance includes over 250 organizations from across the country, which are not just mental health organizations, but also cross-sectoral organizations, organizations of carers and people with lived experience, organizations working in social justice, philanthropy, academia, and so on, because we believe that mental health is not a biomedical issue alone, but a development concern that needs cross-sectoral collaboration. Our Knowledge Center, which is an offering from our alliance, is a repository of mental health resources and toolkits and reports and programs, which has been co-curated with and for our alliance members. And just recently, we finished hosting our first national convening in Delhi at the India Habitat Center. A little bit, perhaps, about the programs to set in context what we are going to also be doing here today. Over the last 2 years, IMHA has been pioneering capacity building programs for mental health professionals like the Therapist Compass, the Being in the Doing, the Practice Playbook, Hamare Anubhav, Hamari Awaaz, Neurodramatic Play, and others that intentionally bring lived experience experts and professional experts into dialogue and move beyond tokenism to explore real world practice dilemmas, ethical concerns, power dynamics, and possibilities for making mental health care more responsive, humane, and accountable. I'm very excited to announce that in the coming months, we will be launching our next program, which is a program for early career psychiatrists, which focuses on ethical, reflective, and collaborative practice. We are also going to be launching a program for mental health professionals, all mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, psychologists, allied health professionals, social workers, cross-disciplinary mental health professionals, which is focused on learning from experts by experience, who themselves have navigated care journeys, and using this expertise to strengthen our mental health care practice, services, and systems. Moving on to our session today. We've actually had a large number of signups and a very promising interest in this topic that has slowly, quietly, and slowly gained visibility in mainstream mental health care discourse. And we've had people sign up from across diverse disciplines of mental health, including psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy, allied mental health professions, but also the length and breadth of the country, which is a testament to how much this topic has probably resonated with a lot of you personally and professionally. Today, for this session, we are bringing together mental health professionals who bring their own lived experience and caregiving journeys to the forefront of their identities and practice. Our intent for this session really is that this conversation would encourage all of us as mental health professionals to think about how our own professional identity and lived experience can sit alongside in the room, in the same person, and be used to strengthen mental health care, training, supervision, service design, and policy. The contributors who I will be introducing shortly and who you'll be hearing from are all mental health professionals whose stories form a core part of the book Homecoming. I'd like to invite Neha Kirpal, who is the co-author of the book Homecoming, along with Dr. Nandini Murali. Neha is also the founding cohort member of the India Mental Health Alliance. She is a co-founder of IMHA and someone who has navigated her own journey with complex PTSD while being a lifelong carer to a parent with schizophrenia and is a sibling suicide loss survivor. Neha, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Bakul, and everyone here who have registered to come for this session. Needless to say, in the course of our lives, many of us have experienced some of the challenges while providing care or experiencing mental health conditions, and yet I don't know if enough spaces have existed where we could actually reflect and share and learn from each other. In that. So as Bakul mentioned, for myself, right from my journey in the 1980s as a young person to now over the last few years, building our organizations across IMHA, Children First, the India Mental Health Alliance, we've seen so many gaps and challenges that exist, whether it is in terms of understanding, whether it's in terms of perspectives, navigating care, or simply having an insight into what different people's version of the same story might be. And in the course of that, how we could possibly bring clinicians and carers and people with mental illness together to be able to co-create solutions and possibilities for better care and support, both in the community as well as within clinical practice and in service design. And so with all of that, the journey for me actually started when my younger brother passed, and I was put in touch with Nandini thanks to her book called Left Behind, which she had written when she had lost her husband to suicide. And that actually started a journey of reaching out to other friends and colleagues and people who are maybe part of different sectors in society, but have all found a version to thrive in, a version to grieve in, a version to cope with, as they've sort of dealt with their own mental health journeys. And so the book Homecoming really is that collective effort. There are 11 stories here in first person, lived experience narratives of all of us, and some of the contributors are here today. Very grateful for this open dialogue and safe space that has been created. And we hope that these conversations can spark many more, and that this is the beginning of a movement that IMHA would very, very much like to be a part of and catalyze. So with that, thank you all for being here today. And Bakul, I hand over to you to take the panel forward, and really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. And we'll move right into our session for the day. But before we begin, a reminder for everyone here that we have intentionally curated this space to be as safe and respectful as possible. And The stories and perspectives that you will witness today may resonate with you at a very personal and deep level. Please feel free to engage the way that you would want to and as much as you want to, and take a step back if you feel overwhelmed at any point. Uh, how we will flow for today's session is that we will hear from each of our panelists individually, briefly at first, followed by a panel discussion. And then we will have time for audience interaction and questions, during which time I'll invite you all to share your questions for our panelists, and probably also share uh, just a few guidelines as we engage with questions to keep the space safe. And with that, it's my honor really to invite Dr. Purnima Vishwanathan, our first speaker for the day. Dr. Purnima Vishwanathan is a clinical psychologist who is currently working as an assistant professor at Jindal University in Sonipat. I won't say much more about Purnima. Purnima, please, over to you to share your opening piece and kickstart us today. Purnima, if you could unmute.
Me. Yeah. But am I audible?
You're audible and we can see you, but your voice is glitching a little bit. I think there's a network issue.
Mm, should be better
Yeah,
now, I'm
yeah,
hoping.
seems okay now.
Okay, sorry about that. Hi everyone, and it's really an honor to be here today. And I want to begin by locating myself briefly in this space. I'm a mental health professional, a therapist, an educator, and a supervisor. And I'm also someone who's lived for many years with trauma and serious mental illness. These identities for me have unfolded alongside each other, shaping how I work, how I learn, how I listen, and how I stay present. I'm also someone who holds privilege to be able to share my lived experience in the way I'm able to do today. And I think there are a lot of different narratives that kind of are coming up, and a lot of different um, things that I want to speak about in today's session. But I think what stands out right now is I want to tell you a little bit about how I learned to function for a long period of time in my life since my childhood. So I lived with years of trauma without having language for it. And I learned early how to stay capable, consistent, resilient, and productive, and how to move through life appearing steady while also quietly bracing inside. And that way of being kind of carried me through school, carried me through work and training. And over time, it kind of became the only way of being for me, and it became very familiar. Um, in early adulthood, there was one major incident of assault that intensified everything that I had been holding together. And after that, I entered what I now recognize as a state of functional freeze, continuing to show up, continuing to meet expectations, to do what was required, but at the same time, feeling emotionally numb and disconnected underneath. And from the outside, I was functioning, but internally, much of my energy went into survival and just holding myself together each day. I eventually sought professional help, and I was hoping for a space that felt contained and that could hold me, and somewhere I could speak slowly and without exposure. The care I encountered, however, was very rushed and there was no hearing. I mean, I wouldn't call it care at all. And there was no holding, and it was just about protocol. And my experience was discussed without my consent, and decisions were made when I was not ready for them. And I left with this familiar sense of losing agency. Um, I was already studying psychology then, and there was this state of dissonance, state of confusion as to if this is how the field really is. Is this a field that I would want to be in? But I kind of stayed and I trained and I practiced and I taught while my own mental health continued to unfold alongside my work. Depression, hospitalizations, medication trials, ECTs, cognitive loss, and later a diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder and complex PTSD that I now live with. And much of this happened while I was embedded within mental health institutions, moving between these roles of clinician, student, patient, teacher. There was a moment during a hospital admission where a psychiatrist looked at me and said, "You're a psychologist, shouldn't you know better?" And what stayed with me was the loneliness of that moment, and the expectation it carries, right? That understanding mental health should somehow shape how suffering appears and how you appear. Over time, I feel like as I'm sitting with who I am now as a person and as a professional, what I feel I tend to do more of is I listen closely for what feels difficult to say by students, by my clients. And I notice when conversations move faster than the person in front of me seems ready for. And I feel like I pay attention to small moments. It could be a pause, it could be a hesitation, a shift in the room, because those moments often seem to carry meaning for me. And I feel like a lot of these things that I'm doing more of and I feel more attuned to is largely rooted in the lived experience that I've carried for many years. And being both a mental health professional and somehow someone who lives with serious mental illness is something that I continue to navigate. It constantly asks for reflection, supervision, and care. And especially in the Indian mental health context, where hierarchy and endurance are often woven into how we are trained, these overlaps feel especially present. Over time, I've come to experience healing as something that unfolds in small openings, moments where language settles, where presence actually feels possible, and where care can be received. And as I'm talking today, I feel like that's the space I'm holding as we begin this conversation. And I'll now hand over to Bakul to introduce the rest of the panelists, and excited to see where we go today.
Thank you, Purnima. I wasn't ready for you to hand over back to me because I was listening, almost stopped in my tracks because I think you've touched on things that so many of us here in the room who have navigated training systems, who've navigated care systems as professionals and perhaps as people with lived experience. I think it really, really struck a chord. And following our panel discussion, I would really love to dive a little bit deeper on how you've navigated this intersection between your personal journey and your professional growth as a therapist, and how these two identities have spoken to each other, and also how they've been met with by the external systems that you've navigated. Thank you for starting us off. And like Deepika has just put in chat, more power to you. Thank you. I'd now like to invite our second contributor, Dr. Raisa. Dr. Raisa is a registered doctor in the India and the UK, and she is currently working in psychiatry. Raisa, over to you.
Thank you, Bakul. So, hi, good evening, everyone. I am Raisa, and before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that due to certain personal and professional reasons, I am using a pseudonym and won't be on camera today, but I do hope that my voice can still carry what needs to be heard. So I've been very graciously invited here today by IMHA as a lived experience expert. And I'll be very honest that the particular phrase, it's very strangely in my body. And I guess perhaps it's because for the last 2 decades of my life, expertise was something that was used on me and not something with me. And a little bit of background, if I can give you. So I am a doctor who completed my MBBS about 2 years back. I did my MBBS from India, and I am registered as a junior doctor both in India as well as in the UK. And I am also an early career researcher. I hold executive positions in some junior doctor national and international organizations. And I've also worked for about 5 years now as a lived experience advisor across some national and international organizations like Center for Mental Health, Sanghat, Wellcome Trust, King's College, as well as Oxford. But long before any of that, I entered this mental health services as a patient, and I entered at a very tender age of 8. And over the last 2 decades, as I jokingly call myself, I was reduced to a walking, talking DSM ICD, and I carried n number of labels across my multiple records that spanned across 9 inpatient hospitalization in multiple private institutions and government institutions like PGI, NIMHANS, AIMS. And now ultimately I've landed with the labels of complex PTSD, ADHD, and recurrent depressive disorder. I'm also a survivor of multiple big T and small t traumas. And I also call myself as a psychiatry and a psychotherapy survivor, certain terminologies which makes a lot of professionals squirm in their seats. So, for the last 2 decades of life, the years of hospitalizations, years of iatrogenic trauma, and I am someone, most of you must have seen in your OPDs or IPT settings, what you call as a nightmare of a patient, the one that gets labeled as difficult, treatment resistant, non-compliant, non-engaging, all those kind of terminologies which we use for certain of our patients. And for a lot of time, all these terminologies became a part of my identity. I could not see beyond what I achieved. All of these achievements took a backseat, but I saw myself through the lens of what mental health services saw me as. And in fact, the label even became louder than my voice. It followed me into case notes, ward rounds, and conversations I wasn't even a part of. In a way, this illness also became an answer to the question which I was asked quite frequently, why psychiatry? And I would say that I'm not someone who's choosing psychiatry. It's the field that chose me. It chose me at a very tender age of 8. And I did not choose it through fascination, at least in the initial stages of it. I chose it through proximity. I chose it because of polypharmacy, because of restraint, seclusion, therapeutic harm, and the power hierarchies I didn't have the language to name at that point of time. So today, I'm not here as a perfect survivor or a finished professional or even a success story for that matter. I would call myself a very failed experiment of both psychiatry and psychotherapy, and someone who's still navigating the intersection of both my personal and professional roles, trying to reclaim my voice, because that is also that is the title of my story, Reclaiming My Voice, My Narrative from Struggle to Strength. And I'm really hoping that others like me, even less privileged, more marginalized, are able to reclaim their voices, like me being a part of Homecoming was an attempt towards that. Thank you all for being here, and I am really privileged to be a part of this discussion today and hope we can all unravel the complexities of this lived experience expertise and how it can better shape our mental health ecosystem.
Thank you, Raisa. I hope you can see the hearts and the applause flying in the air, literally, for you. And I want to thank you for bringing in very necessary discomfort into the room, because all of us as mental health professionals, we constantly need to be shown the mirror. It's very, very easy to get carried away by the seduction of doing good and meaning well, and good intentions and good training are not enough. And I'm so grateful that we get to hear from people who have been survivors of psychotherapy and survivors of psychiatry, because we should never forget, we should never ever forget the history of abuse, violence, and misuse of power that is associated with the mental health profession at large. And thank you for reminding us that this is a very, very uncomfortable space for us all to navigate. And I hope that we can continue to remember that bad, poor, uh, well, abuse of power or insensitive practice isn't something out there being done by others. Each one of us carry within us the possibility and culpability of being extremely harmful in our practice without possibly even intending to be so. So thank you for that. Um, I would now like to invite our third panelist for the day, Dr. Kavita Arora. I'm sure many of you already know Kavita, but Kavita is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. She is the co-founder of Children First and one of the founding cohort members of the India Mental Health Alliance. And among her diverse identities, Kavita identifies as queer and has been a leading voice in the fight for marriage equality in India. Over to you, Kavita.
Thank you. Thank you, Bakul. And thank you, Purnima and Raisa, for setting the stage. And I mean, I think I'm already in a reflective space, and it seems like a great honor, much as I've said before, to share this space with all the 11 people who've contributed to the book and have the courage to come out and speak about their experiences, about our experiences. So I thought I would share a little bit of my personal story, which is what I have found most difficult to bring into the wholesome space of myself and my profession. I think as I've grown up, we've been taught that you should keep the personal separate from the professional, and that is what a good profession or professional space is about. Almost as if your own life and its experiences will taint the professional space. Whereas I found over a period of time that separating the two and not including one in the other was actually unhelpful for me. I actually used to get a lot of insights both ways. I mean, my professional learnings applied to my personal space, and my personal learnings applied in my professional space. So to locate myself in context for everyone here, I grew up in Delhi as the younger of two siblings. My parents are middle class. My father was a doctor, the local doctor in South Delhi. We used to stay in a government colony. As I grew up, there were certain things in my mother's behavior that were question marks, really. But as a child, I didn't really know what was going on. One of the things that I now look back is about there are no spaces, or there were no spaces where one could go and talk about the behavior of a parent or how one felt as a child. And I don't think those spaces really exist in our society. So as I grew up, I had no vocabulary, no understanding of what I learned later was that my mother had mental illness, she had schizophrenia. But to me as a child, that's not something which was known to me. And there was no space in which one could talk about this even, or question it even. So as I grew up and became more aware of how other people's lives were, I think that's when, for the first time in my teens, I realized that maybe not every mother was the way that mine was. Maybe every household was not the way mine was, and there were periods of time when my mother was delusional or violent or had hallucinations or had behaviors that were what would be called unreasonable. Um, I mean, there were instances where we would go for days without food because she was unwell. There would be instances where neighbors would bring her from outside while she was in a state of incoherence, and we wouldn't know what to do. So we used to live in that neighborhood where everybody knew that there were times when there were loud screams from our house, where there was violence, and the next morning we had to go out to school and face everyone without having any space or place to deal with our own feelings, me and my brother. Um, and I think over a period of time, I learned to say somewhere in my mind, I have to separate um, what I need to do in terms of action, in terms of life. I have to separate the gaze that I feel from people who know what's going on at home, but from afar. And I have to separate what childhood means and what the relationship between my parents and I or my brother means. And that's how we lived. There was no therapy, there was no access to services, there was no knowledge that this was a mental illness. Therefore, there was no other space in which one could go and say, we need help. Nobody really knew what to do, including our neighbors. This is when my father is actually a doctor, or was a doctor even at that point in time. So it was only in medical school that I finally got to know suddenly that, and I think this is something that I've written in the book. That's how I start my chapter. I read a paragraph in the forensic medicine textbook. So, of all places, there is a paragraph in the Indian forensic medical textbook that one reads in third year. One paragraph about paranoid schizophrenia, and I looked at it, and for the first time, I felt like I had words for maybe what was going on with my mother. And I went home and I spoke to my brother, and I said, you know what I found, look at this paragraph, and this is what I think mom has. And he was like, yeah, I mean, this is what she has. And I knew about it. And dad told me when I was in class 10, didn't you know? And that's how I got to know that I was the last person in my family to get to know that this illness had a name, this behavior had uh, had a reason. And and from then, I think I grew interested in finding out more. Are there other people who have schizophrenia? What happened with them? What could be done about it? All of that. And I think I devoured whatever I could in terms of knowledge from whatever was available. I think one of the dilemmas always has been which are the spaces in which one can talk about it. So even then, I couldn't bring it home very much. It was too painful. So it wasn't easy to say, I'll sit down with my brother, or I'll sit down with my father, or I will sit down with my mother and talk about the fact that it's an illness. And let's talk about it. So in those spaces or in our extended family, we were isolated from our family for about 14 years because of certain incidents that happened that my mother did. And we were estranged really from both sides of the family. So we were more or less for 13 or 14 years alone. But there were no spaces to talk about this. There were books, there were professional spaces in which one could go and speak. But because I was not taking my mother to the psychiatry department, there was no space to really speak about myself as a carer or an understanding of schizophrenia. You could only read from the books, or that was that really. There were no ordinary, relatable people whom one could turn to say, here are people who also have had mental illness and who are ready to tell us a little bit about their experience, or even caregivers. There weren't any groups that one could go to. There's no access. So this is the sense I have. The spaces are either in the mental health profession for the people who reach the professional, because there are some ethics that seem to bind the professionals. You can't speak about people who are outside of your purview, who are not your clients. So there is this large percentage of people who are either afflicted or allies or carers who have no place to go in society with anything. And I was part of that space. My experience after I became a psychiatrist, became a student of psychiatry, was also to say, you can't really talk about your mother with your colleagues. And that's how we are brought up, I think. There was a sense of disloyalty. There was a sense of breaking confidence. There was a sense of betrayal that I felt as I grew into the profession. In saying, I have some experience from home. Let me tell you what a delusion looks like. No, the delusion has to be defined by the book. So the definition in Fish, all those who are psychiatrists, we used to read Fish's book. And I had to learn the definition of a delusion, whereas all through my life I had experienced firsthand what delusions were. And so in that journey then of my mother has now passed. It's 10 years this month to the time that she has passed. I think that one of the reasons I became a psychiatrist was how I grew up. I won't call it trauma because I didn't see it as trauma at that point in time. I didn't see it as adversity. I just saw it as my life. I had no comparison. And I thought I had a really good childhood. I had a good time. Of course, there were some ups and downs, but I think everybody has ups and downs. And of course, that's the only mother, that's the only childhood I had. So, well, that's how you embrace life. And I think that's what lived experience really is, what is happening to you and how you embrace it. I have often wondered as a dilemma that if somebody had told me this was abusive or this was neglect, what might have changed in my own feelings towards her, towards my father, towards my life, towards how I saw myself located, I don't know. So I have not been able to say it would have been better if I had received mental health care access at that point in time. I somehow wonder maybe it was best I didn't know that I was the child of a parent with mental illness and therefore disadvantaged or in adversity. I still haven't been able to find an answer to that in my own self that feels authentic. I actually think I might have really self-pitied myself and grown up like a victim, which I did not do, knowing or not knowing what I was faced with. So I'm putting it out there, and this is something that I often now feel is a dilemma I contend with even when I'm working with families. So one of the things that in my journey now over a period of time I have been able to see more clearly is that compartmentalizing this sort of personal and professional has not helped me over the years now. In appropriate ways, bringing in some of that experience has helped me more and has helped some of my families that I work with a lot more. I also think that it has had an impact on me as an individual, and it's very, very difficult to untangle that impact and say this is what the profession has given me and this is what my personal life has given me. So I'm hoping that bringing this sort of sense of wholesomeness and my whole self into the space today is also something that might enrich me, but also enrich the space. So over to you, Bakul, and over to the discussion.
Thank you, Kavita. Please soak in the hearts flying your way.
This new one with the heart bursting is really cool, man. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kavita, for I think each time I hear you speak about your journey, I find that you're constantly making meaning retrospectively and as time unfolds of your journey. And this whole aspect of meaning making is so central to lived experience and the identity of holding that lived experience and how that informs practice. And it's not that single story. It's never the one story that I've learned to frame the way I've learned to use discourse to shape my life experiences and frame my life experiences. And I think that narrative weaving is such an ongoing journey. And it's very interesting how you said how there are new discourses like trauma, neglect, abuse that have now come your way, and you often wonder if this was the gaze with which you had seen your life, how might your quote unquote resilience have looked. Uh, but also thank you for making us for reminding us that it's never simple. It's always non-linear, and it's parts of our lives speak to each other, parts of ourselves speak to each other. And thank you for making that conversation within you visible to everyone today. I'd now like to move into bringing all three of you together for this discussion today. Each of you have opened up parts of yourself and your story individually for people who are attending this session today. But over the next 40 minutes or so, I want us to dive a little bit deeper from your individual locations and from your learning of navigating your own journey and of the journeys you've witnessed for people that you've worked with. Some crucial anchors that people can reflect on today as mental health professionals, and perhaps also take away. But before we get too concrete, I want to not assume that everybody here in the audience today is familiar with the term and the terminology lived experience expertise. Perhaps we all are familiar with lived experience. But what is this idea of expertise that is associated with lived experience? So perhaps my question to all three of you is, what is expertise by experience mean to you? And how does somebody's lived experience actually become an expertise that is valuable in mental health?
Pune, would you like to go first?
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Kavita. But yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a mm, deep and powerful question, Bakul, because you were just talking about how this discourse and how this narrative of us kind of keeps evolving, right? It's not the same, but I feel like this meaning that I associate with lived experience and expertise by lived experience also keeps evolving. So sometimes in the middle of the night, there's just this one thing that stands out and says, and of course, that's really a form of expertise that we can bring in through lived experience. So for me, when I think about it, of course, the expertise that we are all expected to have is usually through textbooks, is usually through lectures, the DSM, the ICD training, theories, etc. And that's a form of expertise, I think, more or less, we become both explicitly and implicitly familiarized with over time. Um, but I think there's so much value that comes in from holding lived experience as expertise. Because just like Kavita was sharing in her story, there's so much of difference that comes in with reading a definition of a delusion versus placing it in somebody's story and saying, this is someone's life and this is their story and this is their experience. So the difference is when someone comes in to me and then, I kind of say that, hey, maybe, you have schizophrenia versus listening to, hey, this is your story and what happened to you rather than what is wrong with you, right? And expertise by lived experience, one is, of course, you come in with certain stories yourself and your lived experience yourself. And I think often the misunderstanding when it comes to lived expertise by lived experience is that it's always about self-disclosure, that you go around sharing your story, you tell your clients your story, you tell your students your story, and then you become an expert.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, that's not expertise by lived experience, but it's rather because of the lived experience that you hold. What do you become more present to in the room? What do you become more attuned to? And what parts of the story that you listen to more of that you might not have otherwise listened to? And what are you holding in your body as you're listening to the client or the person in front of you speak, right? And so much of that then requires reflection, requires awareness, requires presence. And I think that's what expertise by lived experience brings in, that may be very difficult to just learn from textbooks and learn from lectures or really listening to any of us speak in the room today.
Thank you, Purnima.
Kavita, you go next.
Thank you. Thank you for tagging me. And thank you for setting the stage. Um, I'd like to start from where, Purnima, you're leaving off, and to say that um, the thoughts I have about lived experience, this is a new concept that is being brought in the last few years. It's not a concept that existed prior to this. But if we take a step back and say that we all know that mental health and mental illness has increased in prevalence over the last decade. All of us know that. We also know that whatever service provisions are there, whatever care is there, is breaking down. It's a broken system. We are not being able to provide for it. So if you keep that in mind, and we say that there is a very large treatment gap, but prevalence is increasing across the age span, then one of the ways of looking at services or looking at what does one do about this as a problem is to say, how are people actually dealing with that 90% gap right now, and who's actually looking after that gap? So we are saying mental health professionals are not, but the illness exists. Who's looking after it? Who's dealing with it? And those people who are dealing with it and have been dealing with it for the last 2 decades must have some expertise and experience by now, which we are not recognizing. And who are those people? Those are the people who are actually living through it. Those are the people who have successfully survived it and are still functioning well. And those are the people who are probably closest to them, carers and allies, who would have a lot of experience, which mental health professionals may not have. So if 90% of the illness population is being looked after by these people over the last 2 decades, then are we saying that there is a sort of strength-based expertise that exists that we are not unlocking, that we are not finding credibility about, that we are just not paying attention to? And we are saying that the people who are taking care of the 5% are the ones that we should resource. So I think, to me, the biggest thing about lived experience expertise is here is a potential strength-based resource of already present resources in our society that we are refusing to unlock. And if we could legitimize this, if we could find a way to legitimize this, then I wonder if addressing this treatment gap and addressing mental health services across the age span could become a lot less burdensome for the handful few who seem to be the gatekeepers and decide as mental health professionals that we are responsible for it. We are not. The entire community. Mental health is universal. Mental illness is universal. The entire community is dealing with it. Let's recognize the expertise that may actually already be present. Let's unearth it, make it credible, and make it recognizable. So to me, that is lived experience expertise in mental health. And I think if we are able to, in a sense, collate it, curate it, bring it forth, and make it complementary to whatever services we have right now, we are then unlocking potentially a huge gold mine of resources that can really help anyone and everyone across the country and maybe globally. Okay, I'm handing back. Raisa, would you like to?
Thank you, Dr. Kavita and Dr. Purnima. I think you've included most of the points. I think for me also, lived experience expertise has something which has been a very evolving step at multiple stages of time. Like when 5 years back, I was asked to be a lived experience advisor on multiple projects. The notion that I had at that point of time and what I have at this point of time has evolved over the course of the few years I've seen. Specifically when I see that, a lived experience is something we all have. It doesn't have to be a lived experience of mental illness. We anyways bring something on the table if we talk about clinicians or researchers. It's about, I feel it's more about naming something that already exists and how to redefine it further, because more or less when we talk about lived experience expertise, especially in mental health space, a lot of if I talk about my own colleagues, they fear that it is about dismantling something and creating it from scratch, but not recognizing, like you said, that it is something that already exists. For instance, if we just talk about, qualitative researches, which is already happening in the mental health landscape, this is also a form of lived experience uh, expertise, right? But then how, I won't call it meaningful co-production, but it is something that exists already. If we talk about guidelines or frameworks, we are heavily dependent on nice guidelines for that matter. These are also some things which were initially, when they came in 1999, over the course of the last few years, you saw a lot of public and patient involvement that went through. And right now, there are important parts, these guidelines are framed by including those patient voices. So I think for me, over the course of last few years, I felt that for at this point of time, we don't have a booklet or we don't have a framework, what lived experience expertise looks like. It is, as we are in this space, like, we speak in medicine, you have to do something, you have to get your hands dirty and actually learn what something is. So I feel this somewhere falls on that spectrum. The lived experience expertise, what we bring to the table, how it evolves over time, how we are contributing to the services, like you said, highlighting the lacuna, the fractures that already exist within the system itself. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Purnima, Kavita, Raisa, for actually bringing to the fore that lived experience in different shapes and forms as has been recognized, but has always sat on the fringe of mainstream discourse, on the fringe of scientific knowledge, which is the core fulcrum of truth that we understand about mental health. And when it sits on the fringe, it is sometimes positioned as anti-psychiatry, or it's positioned as, okay, just peer support, or positioned as, well, maybe Alcoholics Anonymous, as not that's something that's part of the core central support system that people can access, but something that sits outside the hallowed professional corridors of mainstream mental health. And then we've seen that thanks to movements like Nothing About Us Without Us, thanks to the UNCRPD, the United Nations Convention for Rights of Persons with Disability, which included mental illness in it, we've seen the rise of user survivor movements, the advocacy for more rights-based practices. In India itself, the Mental Health Care Act had so many voices of people with lived experience informing it in different ways. We then moved to tokenistic inclusion, right? Let's include. There was still us including them, giving people a seat at the table, and their lived experience of mental health concerns became story sharing, tokenism. Let's include that one person with lived experience on our panel, on our board, on our a lot of tokenism, not true co-production, but just participation, perhaps. But what we're talking about today is something a little bit more deeply integrated. Can professional expertise and lived experience expertise stand as equal, speaking to each other and informing each other, complementing each other? And what would that look like? Not better than, more than, less than, opposed to, but talking to each other, and actively shaping what mental health care looks like. And in that, we are able to engage with people with lived experience as partners, collaborators, and co-producers of this entire space. I want to ask, as I kind of trace this arc, what are some assumptions about lived experience expertise that people make, uh, or that you might have experienced?
I think what I personally feel one of the assumptions is that, it does not get recognized as a form of knowledge. It is more seen in terms of disclosure. Another thing that I commonly see, when I talk in professional spaces, it feels like professionals more or less feel like it is, questioning the hierarchy, or it is about dismantling the system, or, it is giving up the authority. But, what essentially it means is to just share it ethically and accountability. That's what it is adding to it without taking the authority part of it. So I just feel that, these are the two common assumptions that I experience in my day-to-day practice while I interact with the clinicians or even my colleagues for that matter.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Raisa. Purnima, Kavita, any thoughts?
May I, Purnima? Thank you. I think one of the things that I find is an assumption is that a single story or one story is not good enough to be called knowledge. So just because it happened to you does not mean that it is worthwhile to generalize it to others, and therefore it is not of use to a professional. So I think that's one of the assumptions that I find, that it is just not enough. It's not seen as enough or objective. And that comes from the systemic nature of saying the only thing you can believe is randomized controlled trials with X number of people who have been anonymized. And that is the gold standard, and nothing else is the gold standard. So people are not the gold standard. So I think that's one that I find very often as an assumption. The other assumption is it is too intense. Don't bring it in. It clouds judgment and it clouds objectivity. So if you are talking about something which is so personal and it arouses emotion in the other and as well as you, that's not science. That's not worthwhile. That's emotional. And that is therefore subjective and not objective. And in the professional field, objectivity is more important. So let's not go into subjectivity at all. Let's not go into emotion at all. Let's not go into intensity at all, because that is equivalent to clouding of judgment and objectivity, which is the hallmark of a good professional. So I think this assumption I find very often, even today. And I just think that it makes emotions make people uncomfortable. So there is a certain kind of training that we get to devoid the space that we are entering professionally of emotions over a period of time, at least as doctors, because there is so much intensity in the work we do every day. There is almost a self-preservation, instinctual derobing of emotion that as doctors we find helpful for self-preservation as psychiatrists. And as we do that, it becomes very important to keep away emotion from that space, because otherwise you will have to bring your whole self in, you will bring all your emotions in, and then what will happen if you do that every day with every client, with everyone, then what happens to you? So yeah, those are some of the assumptions that I feel I still hold some of them very strongly. There will be spaces that I will not bring in lived experience expertise, while I'm okay to bring in the professional part, even today. Purnima.
Yeah. Thanks, Raisa. Thanks, Kavita. I think you've pretty much captured most of what's going on in my mind as well. But Kavita, when you were talking, I was reminded of the movie Munaba MBBS, and how they talk about you. You can't really feel when you're doing surgery or when you're a doctor. And that kind of takes me back to my own training and maybe a lot of our training as mental health professionals as well, where I think neutrality and objectivity are emphasized the most. And I do remember when I was in my MPhil and PhD training, a lot of the time when I would bring lived experience into the supervision space, it was treated as something that shouldn't exist. And that shouldn't be present. And if you are a mental health professional, you can't have lived experience. And then I was also kind of told, maybe do you want to consider a different career? Maybe you might want to teach and not really be a mental health professional. So I think a lot of assumptions in terms of you can't hold lived experience and navigate mental illness or navigate complex needs if you are a mental health professional itself is a very common assumption that I see. But when it comes to lived experience expertise, it's one of the assumptions is that when you come in with lived experience and expertise, you automatically negate um, evidence-based knowledge, right? That it's either research-based knowledge, theory-based knowledge, or it's lived experience-based knowledge. And it kind of doesn't go hand in hand, and it's like two opposite extremes, right? And I think it's important how we think about, it's not really about negating research-based evidence, but when you come in with a lived experience lens, you also look at research in terms of who are the uh, people who are being parts of this research, who are the what are the voices that are being considered, what are the voices that are being left alone, are we researching on people, are we researching people? So the way we look at research based knowledge also then shifts. I think the other assumption is also that as we are moving into talking more about lived experience and making it visible, that some people start looking at it as only people with lived experience and who talk about lived experience can be experts, right? And lived experience automatically brings in empathy. And if you have lived experience, you then know what the other person in front of you is feeling, right? And I think that's not really lived experience expertise, but it's really about I have lived experience. So that means that I know that the person in front of me who holds lived experience is the expert of their life, and there's so much expertise that they bring in into the space. So these are some things that are coming up for me as I think about what assumptions are commonly there.
Yeah, I'm reading the chat and the responses that are coming on chat, and Nupur very rightly spoke about how binary and reductive we make these complexities. And I think, at least speaking from psychotherapy training, one of the earliest, because psychotherapy came from Freud, who himself was a neurologist and came from the medical professional, this medicalized objectivity was very core to how psychotherapy was conceptualized, perhaps, and a lot of cautionary tales of how the voices from your own life are contaminate the neutrality of therapy or confound what's coming up. But thankfully, later on, we've as the history of the therapeutic and helping professions has evolved, we've heard of self of therapist, wounded healer, family of origin. At least some of those discourses have taken center stage in therapy. I don't know what language exists in psychiatry to humanize and personalize and contextualize the profession. But for therapists of a certain persuasion, the self of the therapist is inextricable from good work and constantly bringing the self in. Or at least reflecting on the ways in which the self is coming in and intentionally using the self is extremely important. And that brings me to asking you all what it's been like to actually be a mental health professional that has brought their story to the center stage of their professional identity. And What have been perhaps some of the barriers that you've experienced, barriers that may have been external by the system, and barriers perhaps that you might have encountered within you towards becoming an expert by experience alongside a professional expert?
Should I go?
Sure, Aisa.
Yeah. So I think it's been a tough journey, and one I have to navigate on a day-to-day basis based on circumstances. But yes, there are multiple barriers that come up, like you said, the individual barrier. Even we are a part of the same mental health ecosystem. We can talk about stigma eradication and do all sorts of campaigns. But there is some degree of internalized stigma that I personally found within me, especially when it comes to, severe mental illnesses. I talked about my depression and anxiety from last many years, but when it actually comes to talking about the psychotic breakdowns, or if I have to talk about the pseudo hallucinations, that's internalized stigma is already there. And there is always this fear of credibility that exists. Once you put out that story, how credible you will be considered, not just with your patients, but even amongst your colleagues, especially in a setup like medicine, which is based on power hierarchy. It erodes through it, not just when you're dealing with the patients, it's when you're dealing with your juniors or seniors, especially in the Indian setup that you see. And, because more or less, I think the system in itself is like, uh, it rewards silence rather than vulnerability. And we often confuse like professionalism with the distance. So I think these are some of the if factors, individual and systemic factors that overlap. And also because, more or less our services are more or less volume driven. So we don't have a lot of reflection time, a lot of biological essentialism that you've said already exists. So the system is not prepared to hold that vulnerability. So for a very long time, I thought, why was this internalized shame, or why was, I would have a major collapse after being vulnerable. There would be threat, was it too much of oversharing, how much of it is right? But then after a time, you realize that, the system is not prepared to hold that vulnerability for you. So I think these are some of the individual and systemic barriers that I have experienced over the course of last few years.
Thank you, Raisa. There's such a sharp internalized surveillance that you talk about, that the gaze of the system uh, puts on us. And the other important thing that you said was, I think really struck me, not all lived experiences are created equal. I think there is a lot more tolerance, empathy, respect, patience, and compassion for relatable experiences like depression and anxiety, and much less trust, tolerance, respect for experiences that seem further away from just lived reality, like psychosis, like personality vulnerabilities. There's a lot of distrust that comes in. Even the words that we use clinically in terms of judgment, soundness of judgment or coherence, or I think we systematically reduce the credibility that we associate with the person in front of us, depending on where they may fall on the continuum uh, of, well, lots of continuums that we've thrown around in our categories. But yes, not all lived experiences are created equal. Purnima, Kavita?
I want to echo a lot of what Ressa said, and what you said, Bakul, right now as well, that there's just been so much of internalized stigma towards mental illness that I still constantly grapple with and still try to navigate. Just one instance that's coming up for me is that one thing that I've always struggled with is because I have bipolar disorder, in terms of how my practice goes, because there are times, there are certain episodes when I may have to take a break, or that I may not be able to stay completely present in ways that I might otherwise be able to. So I'd always think about, is should I continue doing this? When I am in a space where I may slip into an episode at any point in time, how do I kind of prepare myself? How do I prepare for my clients for what may be coming up? So I'm blessed with a wonderful supervisor. So one of my first sessions, I told my supervisor, this is something that I'm navigating. My supervisor asked, have you told your clients that you have bipolar disorder? I said, no, of course not. Like, why? And I said, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think I should be sharing something like that. That maybe, you may want to think about if that's something that would kind of help them prepare and, even think about whether to make an informed choice of, whether they'd like to start therapy with you and be in that process with you as you are navigating what works best for you professionally as well. Right? And when I thought about it a little more, I realized though I speak so much about lived experience, I still hold so much of that shame about what I told my supervisor was then are not going to trust me anymore, right? That if I have active episodes, if I have bipolar disorder, how are they going to think that I will be helping them? Right. And that just still kind of, in so many ways, I think that internalized stigma and shame stays with me. And it's a constant thing that I have to be reflective about and, reach out for supervision and, constantly navigate some of these questions within my own self. And yeah, I think that's something that has kind of been a little bit of a challenge. But I think other things that come up is also something that I'm able to hold with reflective practice in terms of, am I going to over identify at certain times with certain clients, and what are some boundaries that I need to have? What about my own system of care that kind of needs to be in place as I'm navigating and holding space for clients as well has been extremely, extremely important. And I think systemically both Bakul and Raisa have just spoken so much, where productivity and objectivity is valued so much, emotional distance is valued so much. And I think when we kind of tune into what lived experience can bring into this space, there can automatically be this door that just kind of shuts and says, do you really want to do that? Right. So I think, yeah, it's a constant back and forth that happens for me.
Yeah. Lots of heads were nodding, Purnima, as you were speaking about the system of care and support. It's never about self-care. It's about systems and layers of care. And I'm so glad that you spoke out loud about supervision and how that's been a space that's really held you and nourished all parts of you and made room for all parts of you in your work. Yeah. Kavita.
Mm, mm, mm. I'm also thinking that in the current way that we have structured services or we have structured mental health care right now doesn't lend itself to even eliciting lived experience expertise or even highlighting lived experience expertise in the system itself. So whether it is how a hospital or a clinic is structured, for example, even in its design. You enter and there is a small waiting area, which is for the passive carer or the lived experience person to go and wait. But it is a passive waiting area. You're not supposed to do anything else except wait. All the action is going to happen inside the room of the therapist and the expert. So before that, you're not an expert. You go inside, you're the expert. You get out, you're in the waiting area, and you get out. So the entire design of the services, whether it is an inpatient or an outpatient, is built to say that the expertise only happens inside that one room. And this comes from the medical professional bits of saying you need a place to examine the patient, and therefore you may need equipment in that room. But that's the entire set and design of the service. That is the entire set of, there are no spaces built to say, is this person active otherwise? Are we thinking about what kind of a person is coming? Are we able to say that if they're waiting for an hour outside, then what is it that they're doing? Are they just going to just wait there and waste their time waiting for the therapist or waiting for the psychiatrist to come? And is that what their role is? So, I mean, even from the way that we are actually looking at the system entirely, there are so many barriers and there are so many bits of even how we elicit the mental health history or the state. The words are all about deficit. How many of us actually say what has built the resilience in this person? How has this person managed to access across all the stigmas that our society has? How have they managed to access this service and come? How have they managed to stay afloat and come? Are there strengths that we are trying to even elicit that are helping them with their recovery? Who are the resources? So in our history taking even, or in our case formulation even, this is rare. We don't ask these things. We don't ask about the expertise that may have helped them in the illness or in the recovery. And this is by design. We are not writing any of it down. We are not eliciting it. We are not asking it. We are not making space for it. We don't have the vocabulary for it. And therefore, there is no attention that's going to be paid for it. The important things are appointment to appointment. Who's the appointment for this particular client? Who's the appointment with this particular doctor or therapist? What about the rest of this person's life? What about the rest of this person's resources? Is all the treatment equal to appointment by appointment? What happens between appointments? Is that not important? Because there is no communication there. There is no. So I think actually that right now mental health care systems and models are built to only look at deficits and the illness within a person, and in fact, within that, the symptoms of the illness within a person. And that in itself, by design, is not going to give us any space. So some of this may have to be looked at as a barrier in itself, a systemic barrier in itself, if we want to change any of this landscape. Everything else except the index, case, and symptom is called supportive.
Yeah.
It's supportive therapy, it's supportive psychotherapy, it is support to the family, it's support to, the employer will support them. So all the rest of your life except the symptom is designed to be secondary, which is actually not humanizing the healthcare at all. So I think in ways that we are designing the entire system, in the ways that we have said body, mind separated, then from mind you separate the illness, then from the illness you separate whether there's an acute stage or you're in the remission state, then, so we've really pared it down and said this is the only thing we will see, the rest of it we won't see. And I think that in itself becomes then a barrier because that's how we are training all of ourselves. So I would say that I think is a systemic barrier. We are only looking for acute episodes of severe illness and not being able to say. So we're looking for risk every time. There'll be a lot of sort of work around, okay, is this risk? Is this not? If this is risk, this is what you do. If this is not risk, then it's okay to not do. So I think in my mind, there are this entire thing has to be sort of reshaped, but let me not overwhelm everyone.
No, I don't think that was overwhelming at all. In fact, I think, Kavita, thank you for reminding us that it's not just about individual stories of expertise, but I think very important to really zoom out, take a macro perspective to how we are thinking about care, how we're designing spaces, how we're designing waiting rooms, how we're designing the language of inquiry or interrogation, rather. And also how this pursuit of science that psychiatry and psychology are both very vehemently on. What is that costing us, perhaps? How has it made our practice reductive, extremely reductive, extremely menu-like, and how the wholeness of people sometimes gets completely invisibilized, because we are moving, like in all other medical professionals, to a culture of super specialization. And we're all becoming more and more adept at very, very specific micro processes, and sometimes the basics and the fundamentals and the synthesis can get lost in that. And with that, I also want to uh, remind everyone that in the coming months, we will actually be bringing forth a program based on lived experience expertise, and how mental health professionals and organizations can integrate this expertise in their practice, in their services, and in systems at large. So, going beyond story sharing and perspectives to actually bringing about concrete, actionable transformations in the way that we imagine care. So, that was an excellent segue, Kavita, to the personal stories that we held and witnessed today, to focusing on how systems really need to be transformed, and how lived experience can play a very, very, but must play a critical role in humanizing care. With that, I'm mindful of time. We're at 6:54 and we have till 7:30, and I want to open up space now for everyone who's been patiently waiting and witnessing and absorbing the stories and the perspectives that came in today. I'd like you all to please type your questions on chat. Just to be mindful to not get into personal questions about the details of people's stories, but perhaps any questions that you might have that might help you reflect and help the group reflect on practice, lived experience, and the intersections between the two. Over to the audience to type their questions, and I will, hopefully, if there are lots of them, I will club them and share them with our panelists. As we're getting warmed up, if somebody wants to unmute themselves and share, or typing is okay. Yeah, we've got our first question. There's a question from Shreyas. How can policy making be backed by lived experience, considering governments do decide for us? And very important question. Thank you, Shreyas, because ultimately the idea is to bridge the personal and the contextual, and have lived experience inform and shape policy. If any of the contributors would like to respond.
I can give it a go.
Sure.
I'm not part of the government. That's the disclaimer. So, Shreyas, I think that's ultimately something that is very important. I do think that's where we should try and head. While you asked how can we, I think the way it happens in our culture and context is only when the voice or voices of someone becomes important enough. That's when the government invites them in for consultation. So one of the ways of making this happen is to make it part of the social discourse so that it becomes part of policy making discourse. The other way of doing it is to make sure that that we keep writing to the government to say this is important enough, this is what is needed, this is what the demand is, whether it is through journalists or it is directly to the government themselves. So in my experience, or in my humble experience, movements become important to the government once they have enough of a voice. And I do think that the lived experience movement, which is just about starting, if it becomes big enough, then we will have a voice with the government. I don't know of any other way. The other way that, please don't ever quote me on this, but if somebody in the government, in the top, actually has a mental illness, or their relative does, that's when it becomes important to people. Because when it becomes personal, that's when awareness and awareness building becomes the most likely. So I don't know how to infect them, but yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Questions coming up about, we recognize the value of lived experience, but are there times when you have to intentionally keep that part of you out of the room? Are there times when you have to separate personal experience from the subjectivity that you do bring to the room? Is there scope for interference from your personal world in your professional world? Another question, how do you handle your emotional responses and triggers? So, a lot about this idea of what happens when it becomes, what are the times and when it becomes perhaps a barrier or a concern, something that you intentionally have to work on?
I'll try to answer that based on how it's been for me, because that's also a question I keep navigating on a daily basis. What I've discovered a little recently that I've found helpful is, in qualitative research, um, people talk about how subjectivity may come in. And, in the process of being reflexive, we write something called a positionality statement. So, say for example, I'm working to understand how grief is experienced in a certain population. Then I write a positionality statement about what is my position in relation to this topic. Like, how do I feel about grief? How do I feel about this in my experience? I've kind of borrowed that and used it in, I'm using it in my therapy notes. And I take this positionality statement to supervision as well in some contexts and with some clients. And I think there's always, whether, we are thinking about lived experience actively or we aren't, I think there's always that, experience that comes in of maybe there is a little bit of over identification. Maybe there are too many emotions coming up. Maybe, what we are experiencing in the moment is coming in the way of holding space for the client. And I think all of these are definitely possibilities. And I think that's where then, staying close to ourselves and staying close to the person in front of us, and also the relationship in the room is so, so important. And that is something that I've been able to do through both reflective practice and supervision. So I can't emphasize enough the power of reflective practice, supervision, and also other forms of, support, like peer support, support, family and friends. I think some of the things that we say in these spaces and some of the experiences that we bring into these spaces also then help us to be a little more reflective about what is ours in the room, what is the client's, and what belongs to the relationship between both me and the client. So being reflexive about my experience, my emotions, and what I am experiencing in my body, both before, during, and between sessions, is something that really helpful.
Kavita or Raisa, do you want to respond?
Sure. I think one of my simple answers is really that I had personal therapy as well for a number of years. Um, and just for the audience to know that the bringing whole self into my presence is not something that was there from day one. I have now been practicing for 25 years. My mother died 10 years ago. My ability to bring in my personal and lived experience is only starting now in the last few years. So it has taken me all this time to actually work through what somebody had said was emotional triggers and all of that. I wasn't able to do that in the first few years of my practice. So I went through quite intensive therapy about my own emotions with my mother, my relationship with her, all of that. And then over a period of time, I have managed to do that. The second thing that I would like to say is I don't necessarily disclose to everyone in therapy or in with my clients. So the way that the disclosure has happened is in the book. For me, it's in a very public space. It's in the book, so my client may or may not have read it, and I may not feel the need to disclose at all during the workspace. Only if needed will I disclose whatever is needed appropriately to bring that in. So I don't think that I am propagating self-disclosure as lived experience at all. It is what it does to one and what it brings in, and the respect, like Purnima had said earlier, my understanding of what the other person, the client, is bringing in changes, because if I respect lived experience, then I respect them more and their expertise more and their carers' expertise more. And because I work with children a lot, I respect the child more and their own personal experience more. And that is how it shapes my practice, rather than self-disclosure being the way that lived experience is shaping my practice. The other one thing that I would say is that it is up to us how we bring it in. So in my case, personally, I have chosen to done it far more publicly. So whether it is my intersection of queerness or it is my being a carer and therefore having lived experience, I've done it through platforms which are not one-on-one, which is either a book or some very public platforms with the same-sex marriage case that we had done, regardless of this thing. So, I think all I wanted to say was that's where I'm at about yeah.
Thank you, Kavita. Raisa, did you want to add anything to this?
I think Purnima and Kavita has covered all the points. And to be honest, I'm in my very early stage of career. It's just been an year so far. And I do agree that, uh, it. I like Dr. Kavita, I do not endorse lived experience sharing, if it does not serve the purpose. It is about, evaluating what benefits the patient, and it's not about me as much as it's about the patient. And like, I do engage in personal therapy from time to time and supervision as well as self-reflection that I do just to see what I'm bringing to the table and how can it benefit to the patient in any way. So I think these are some of the ways, in which I mindfully engage in what I actually bring to the table.
Yeah. Thank you so
And
much.
just sorry,
Yeah, Purnima,
just
please.
something that's up as I'm hearing both of you talk is how expertise by lived experience is also about the humility that comes in that I'm not the expert.
Yeah.
That was not the people.
We're losing you, Purnima.
Sorry, my AirPod fell off. Can you hear me now?
Little better, but like we're hearing you like a pilot in an airplane. Do you want to try
Is
again?
it better?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, sorry, one of my AirPods fell.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I think that there's a lot of humility that's kind of coming in along with it, and that constant reminder of um, the patient and the carer and all the systems that they are holding them are really the experts at the end of the day.
And I think I just sometimes this sort of mutual exclusiveness of either one is the expert or the other. I just feel it is so freeing and liberating and lighter to know that there are several experts across several dimensions. So if in the room the family is sitting, it is so much better for me as a psychiatrist to feel that here are four experts sitting in this room. And maybe the expertise is different on different dimensions. So if we complement each other and we build on the strengths, I have a certain kind of knowledge as a psychiatrist. Somebody else may have a certain kind of knowledge as the mother of the child. And the child has a certain kind of knowledge about themselves. Suppose we are able to share expertise, then we are four experts. Why not do that rather than take the burden of saying you're the only expert in the room? So I find
Yeah,
it
and
a
then
lot better.
care really becomes about community rather than,
And
one
collaborative
person
decision
providing
and
something to
Yeah.
the other.
co-production of the care pathway, all of
Yeah.
that becomes so easy. And if truly one can hold that position, I think the heaviness of the mental health care burden actually
Absolutely.
can really come down.
Yeah, it's very top heavy at the as a pyramid. Even it's conceptualized as a pyramid, right? The
Absolutely.
specialist at the top and the
Yeah.
community at the base, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's circular actually. So let's keep the circles.
Lots of questions coming in. I'm going to try and bring them together thematically. But an interesting question about how your practitioner identity actually lent to your own process of meaning making of your lived experience.
That's such a good question. Uh, so many things in my mind. So I'm going to try and say one or two and then over to Purnima and Raisa. Um, I, from my personal story and from my family, I'd like to say this that I have been fortunate to become a psychiatrist. So, to make meaning of all the years that my mother held delusions about me, for example, my brother, who's not a psychiatrist, my father, who's not a psychiatrist, have not seen all the people or have not experienced people with delusions in the way that I have because I've seen it across the age span and across people. Um, I think my brother still holds much of what my mother used to say as the truth. Whereas I have come to believe that a lot of what she said came from the illness and the delusions. So my ability to look at it as a delusion because because of my practitioner experience, because of the fact that I have then seen 100 others with schizophrenia and delusions and hallucinations, has been a very different experience for me. I think it has helped me heal by externalizing the illness from motherhood and from myself. So, at a very, very personal level, that has really helped me. Say, my mother had schizophrenia, and therefore, this is how she was towards me. Because I used to carry a story about how she hated me and I hated her, and this is so. I think for me, at a very personal level, the practitioner bit has really shaped my relationship with my mother and the motherhood, and in the future and onwards, I also feel this helps me help the families I work with to see how um, how it can be in the future for them. How if the illness is treated well and management of it is done well, how some of the personhood can be reclaimed and how some of the relational spaces can change. Because that's something that I've seen in my life. By the end of her years, because my mother's schizophrenia was very well treated and managed, we were able to, after 14 years of estrangement, we were able to go back to the family that we were estranged from. And she had a good relationship with many of her cousins and many of my father's side of the family. So, I mean, it was full circle because of the treatment. So, I mean, I know I've taken the question from a different lens, but um, I thought it would be valuable to share because it occurred to me.
Thanks, Kavita, for that.
I also deeply resonate with what Kavita shared as well. I think the professional part of me is also kind of helps me give language to my experiences in a way. And, that where I'm able to move away from this sense of being flawed as a person to saying that, some of these experiences are because of the illness, are because of the disorder that I have. And I think that's been very helpful. And to also be able to communicate to professionals in the field, to also be able to communicate to peers in the field. And in some way, I've found that a little empowering to do. The other part that I've, constantly been very surprised with is how much I learn from the clients that I see and the students that I teach when, it comes to my own lived experience. And it helps me discover, so much about who I am and what my experiences are. And I feel like learning from the people around us as we are professional also adds so much value to our own lives as well.
Thank you, Purnima. Raisa, did you want to come in?
I think for me also, it's been a bi-directional relationship
Mm.
between my personal and professional identities, mutual learnings from each of them. I don't know how it comes across, but for those who have read my story in Homecoming, it comes across as too angry, too aggressive towards the system. And now that I'm sitting from the other side of the table, I do realize, certain ruptures that happened were not ill-intentioned, because something that is outwardly mentioned is how my rights were violated under the Mental Health Care Act. But there can be certain micro ruptures that were beyond the system, that were beyond the capacity of the clinician that was providing care. So I think from the other side, it helps me make more sense. It gives me more empathy towards those who try to heal me at multiple stages of time, how I might have misinterpreted, uh, what they were trying to provide me at that care, that point of time without any ill intentions. So I think for me, I would say that, again, it's a bi-directional learning. But more or less, if I have to talk about my personal sphere of life, so I think it made me more compassionate and more empathetic towards the individuals or the clinicians or the system who tried to provide me care at multiple points of time.
Yeah.
Also, I think at this point of time, as a person, I was too meek, I was too timid. Not some, the goody two shoes who never question anything. But, being on both sides, it's made me question the status quo more. To stand up for the patients, to stand up for my own self, when I try to act as a patient advocate, when I try to make sense of their meaning, when I try to represent their voice in front of my colleagues, or when I try to represent their voice in front of the system, somewhere down the line, I feel more empowered within my own personal capacity to stand up for myself as a patient when I am seeking care.
Thanks, Raisa. There's a question, Purnima, Kavita, Raisa, about how treatment slash therapy spaces, we mentioned they need a revamp. And are there things that any of you would suggest can be practically done to start that process so that people who are with us today can take something back to their practice from this witnessing of lived experience expertise?
Should I take this?
Please, sure.
I'll try to. So I think when we talk about revamping the treatment and therapy spaces, again, there are some macro levels of, uh, if we talk about, like I talked about, just the Mental Health Care Act that exists. Now, it exists on the paper, and to some extent, to a lot of extent, it has been employed in multiple institutions. But if you go into rural places, I have personally seen it's not been employed the way it should be. Now, these are some, policy level changes, and these are some major changes that need to come into place. But again, like I said, there are certain micro level changes that can be made because, the system can provide safety, but at the end of the day, it is what the client perceives as safe. So it is very intentional for us to create safety in those spaces. And sometimes it can be as small as, the language that we use. So, so I don't know if this is the right place to share. This is this poem that I have written. I'll just take few lines from it. I had written, just how my perpetrator said, no one will believe me. Mental health services said she lacks insight and mental capacity. Just how my perpetrator told me to submit to me or else. Mental health services said the same. Comply, or else we will force you with medications and seclusions. Just how my perpetrator pinned me to the bed and to do things to me that I did not want. mental health services in that moment did the same, tied me to the bed. This is in talking in context of physical restraints and forced medication. So I think it's certain micro level changes when we talk about in our clinical practice. There are certain frameworks that already exist. If we talk about agitated patients, like verbal de-escalation, physical chemical restraints, these are something that we need to abide by. And, if we talk about subtle changes, like if you talk about the sensory environment in the therapeutic space that is there, or, if you talk about simply if you're talking about rushed consultations, now I understand in government or tertiary institutions, that is something that has to be negotiated because you're dealing with a lot of system burden. But if you are in a private space, this the client might take rushed consultations as again something very adversarial. Or when we are leaving no space for questions, it's not we just delivering it to the patient and not asking how much they've understood and what sense they are making of it. Something that I frequently talk about collaborative psychiatry. So this is this analogy which we use when we are talking about OCPs, the cafeteria approach. We put it in front of the patient and we ask them, what do you want? Similarly, I feel to a certain extent we can actually put it in front of the patient, specifically if it is about collaborative decisions about the medications, taking into account side effects, metabolic disturbance. A lot of females, they simply stop medications when they fear weight gain, and we easily label it as non-compliance, or not understanding the context when we are talking about non-engaging, no show-ups. We're not taking the context behind that. So I think there are certain micro level changes which might not even require any, a lot of people think that it requires a lot of funding or anything of that sort. But certain changes we can make. The bottom-up approach, including these voices at every part of the system, as patient advocates or as, part of the administration or higher up, in, the people who directly converse with the directors and all. So I think this is something that we can try to.
Thank you, Raisa. That's extremely helpful. Purnima, Kavita.
So I'm thinking of the individual practitioner right now in the room today, and I'm saying what are some of the things that we could do in our day-to-day life. So it could be something as simple as the collaborative, this thing of asking the question of how can I help, or is this making sense what I'm saying to you, or do you need more time? So it's about just simply making sure that the other person, the client, is just as present. And that can start from how are they being brought in? What is the way that your room is located? Are you sitting behind a big desk and are they in a less comfortable chair than yours? Or are you facing each other across a smaller table? So even something like that are you going and escorting them from outside in, or are they coming in to a closed door and you're sitting down and they are walking in and then sitting down almost like a principal and a student. So any of these things is about providing a bit more equity and a bit more sort of respect to this entire relationship of client and professional. So asking about strengths, asking about what kept them going, asking about what they do in the rest of their life that keeps them going, what is it that they feel is a sense of motivation for them. All of those things make the other person's self come in more, and for you to be able to respect them. I also feel sometimes that just simply looking at the person and greeting them like you would greet someone, with a smile, with a handshake, and escorting them in. Sometimes we forget to do this, which is as simple as basic human respect. So I think till we are able to do all of these and bring ourselves as equals into that relationship, if we do that, then all these steps follow. So whether it is in the mental status examination, or it is in the history taking, or it is in this thing, if we are going to talk about more than just the symptom, a lot of this will come into place. A lot of the equity is something that becomes embodied, and we actually hold it within ourselves.
Thanks, Kavita. Purnima, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think just to add, one thing that I constantly sit with is the importance of agency and importance of the sense of control that the client and their systems are able to have over care, because oftentimes in trauma, in mental illness and distress, there is this experience of not having control over our own experiences, maybe our own body or our thoughts and feelings. And I think then the role of therapy, the role of other forms of care becomes about helping the client feel like their sense of agency is restored. They make the decisions in their care. They have a choice. And I feel choice becomes so important. Like I was recently diagnosed with autism, and that made me realize how there's been a lot of discomfort around different mental health care systems, physical health care systems, both in terms of the physical space, but also the kind of interactions that happen in these spaces. So a lot of it then comes down to choice for me. For example, when I enter a certain space for care, um, might then just assigned to somebody to kind of, have a conversation about my experiences? Or am I also then given a choice to just fill out a form so that they get an understanding of where I'm coming from? And hence, are there multiple options that we are giving to people who come in for care? I think becomes very important. And I think over time, there's been a shift from compliance, which is obviously a passive form of, the client just following what the therapist or the psychiatrist might be saying, to adherence, where the client plays more of an active role. But I think what can make it more empowering and more collaborative is also concordance, where it's really about the therapeutic alliance between the mental health professional and the client who's coming in. And within that therapeutic alliance, like Kavita said, there is equity where both are coming in together to be able to make these decisions and say, hey, does this sound okay to you? These are some other options, and can we navigate some of these together? So I think that togetherness and that alliance is really important in our day-to-day.
Yeah. Sorry, did you? Yeah. Thanks, Purnima. I'm aware of time, and I'm also aware that we have a lot more questions and a lot of conversation that's been generated today that we possibly can't address and contain in the time that we have left. But we want to continue the conversation, and I can see from the interest in chat that a lot of you do want to continue the conversation. In the form that we circulated a couple of minutes ago, I've just reposted the link again. We want to invite you to share your interest in the thematic of lived experience expertise. Also, just announcing that we are going to be in the coming days, in the coming few weeks, rather, we're going to be bringing together focus group discussions to learn from diverse stakeholders what programming around lived experience expertise should look like, could look like. And if you're interested in being part of this focus group discussions and helping us strengthen our reflections as we build this program out, we would love to hear from you. Please share your email address in the form that we've shared. And my hope is, and all of us at IMHA, our hope is that we can continue this conversation. This is only the beginning. And often, I want to acknowledge there was a comment about how this is a very privileged space. It absolutely is a space of privilege. And I think we're all cognizant of the different layers of privilege and the different layers of vulnerability that each of us is bringing to the space. And I don't think either cancel each other out. But this is just the beginning. And we really want to make sure that the understanding of lived experience and the way that lived experience is integrated to radically shape and transform mental health is actually shaped by people with lived experience. And so it would be great if you could please drop your email addresses if you want to be part of the focus group discussions that will help inform some of our thinking and programming around it. We have a small, very quick before you all transition out, a small Mentimeter exercise, because there are so many of us in the room that are possibly tied together by our experiences, not only as professionals, but as humans. And it'd be useful to see how many of us are bringing different identities and different parts of us to our professional work. And so if you could please click on this Mentimeter link and answer the question that's going to pop up on your screens, and then we will share screen and see what emerges from this collective. The question that this Mentimeter asks you is, in addition to your professional qualification, are you also someone with lived experience of navigating a mental health concern or caring for someone? And I'll request the IMHA team to please share the responses as they come. For those of you who haven't seen the link, I'll share it again. It's just one question, and I'll request the IMHA team to please share screen. Sorry, we'll perhaps just stop the share, Anandita, and fix the response. I think it should be yes and no. Thank you for flagging that. And thank you to everyone who's sharing their email addresses. You can share them in the form, please, so that you don't get spammed. Let me share the form as well with you. Great. We'll actually leave the Mentimeter complexity because technology just complicates life. But if just a show of hands, perhaps as a statement of solidarity and coming together, of how many of us bring our own lived experience to our professional roles and have both of them inform each other. Thank you. I wish I knew how to raise my hand. I will figure it out today. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Please share any feedback that you might have for the session, any suggestions for us. This is only the first of many, many attempts that IMHA is committing to center lived experience, to learn from people with lived experience on how systems, policies, care should be designed. We don't claim expertise in this regard or certainty in this regard at all, and we're hoping to learn from more voices, more diverse voices. So hope to have you along on this journey as we begin today. And please, a lot of you asked about the book. We've shared the link to Homecoming. You can read some of the stories that were shared here today, as well as other stories of people who weren't here today. The link is in the chat. Homecoming is the name of the book. Thank you so much. We're at the hour, and I'd like to thank all our panelists, Purnima, Kavita, Raisa, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining in and being such warm and attuned, such a warm and attuned and generous audience. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Please feel free to transition out.